Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video is going to be a quick patch rundown on what are the strong comps in 12.14. Originally I did delay this video because I thought that there was going to be a B patch due to how unbalanced it was around ASOL, as well as the fact that astral toggling is still in the game. But the astral toggling bug is a little bit more complex than I originally thought, and there's no B patch. So here we are. So starting out in S tier, we of course have ASOL. The reason is because if you give this unit an Archangels or any amount of AP, he will start to eventually one-shot the board at 15 seconds. All you really have to do is stall. Usually you want to play around Morello because it's really strong this patch, and you can just throw that on your ASOL at the end. He doesn't actually need a mana regen item, so instead if you get a Shojin in the early to mid game, you can give it to Zoe later. All you really need is enough frontline and stall, so Zoe does that really well with 3 mages, and then Silas and Ornn can be your default frontline. Of course, Infinite ZZ Rots is really good in this comp. And of course there is a thing called astral toggling where you can toggle in 9 astral in between rounds to get infinite items and guarantee your ASOL too, and that's the main reason that this comp is doing so well right now, because everyone's kind of abusing that bug, which I don't think it'll get patched anytime soon because the fix that Mort said he was going for didn't actually end up working. So for now, a lot of people are just abusing Astral Toggle in order to secure a lot of LP. Next up we have Shioyu / Anivia carry. Now this is really strong this patch because Anivia got buffs, as well as the fact that Morello is super strong on her. If you get yourself a Jade Augment and find a Soraka on 8, then of course you can run 9 Jade, which is probably the most standard way of playing this comp. However, if you don't get lucky with a Soraka and you don't have any Jade Augments, then you can just play 6 Jade and then just throw in whatever legendaries you hit. Another alternative is just to throw in 2 Tempest. Ideally your tank items go on Nico, your AD Bruiser items go on Shioyu, and Anivia holds onto all AP items. You don't actually have to have any items on your Nico, but you do want to make sure that you've at least got 2 out of 3 items on at least Shioyu and or Anivia. Also, an underrated item is Archangels on Raka. This will give you a ridiculous amount of healing. Finally in S tier we have Corki. Now this comp is a direct counter to the Shioyu Anivia boards, which is what makes it so strong, but also the fact that it's just a pretty solid comp in general. Idas got buffs again, so you can now run him as the default frontline. There's a few other variations to frontline, but this is the one that you want to default to. Of course, with Morello being really strong this patch, you can go Morello Sonar. Otherwise, if you want anti-heal, it's just Sunfire Cape on your Idas. You can position like this. You want your Sonar diagonally opposite from the enemy board, and just make sure that your Corki is safe from Siphon, as that's the main threat against this comp. You can of course run Vertical Cannoneer, but usually you're going to be dropping out Jinx for any legendaries. Soraka and Bard both work really well on this board. Bard is higher prior over your Raka, and of course if you go 9 you can cap out with Yasuo too, because sometimes you need Yasuo to stall a little bit longer. However, 1-star Yasuo without items on 8 usually doesn't do much, as he just dies. Moving on to A tier, starting off we have Tristana, which is basically the same board as Corki. However, you're staying at level 6 to 3-star your Tristana, Jinx, Braum, and Thresh. Now, the most important ones to 3-star here are Tristana and Braum, because they're the ones that you're going to be itemizing. Now, the difference here is that Tristana is going to be your main carry. However, once you do 3-star them, you can push levels and play basically the same units. Of course, if you happen to high roll an Idas, you can play it, but most of the time it's just going to be Braum 3 and Thresh 3 if you can afford it. The itemization for Tristana is almost identical to Corki. Now, the tell of whether you play this comp versus Corki is usually how many Tristanas you hit at around level 6. If you're at level 6 and you have a lot of Tristanas, and you can consider playing this comp, same goes for if you have lots of your frontline. Otherwise, you can just push levels and play the Corki board instead. Do know that if you 3-star your Jinx, you want to keep her, otherwise you can technically drop her later. And 3 Trainer, if you're in a strong spot, isn't actually that bad during the mid game here, but eventually you will drop Heimerdinger. Next up in A tier we actually have Swain. Now the default way to play Swain is you go fast 7, you play 6 Demancer. If you have a spat you can fit the entire board, which includes Ornn and Hecarim, so you're running 3 Ragewing, 3 Jade, and 6 Demancer. You always want a Rageblade on your Swain, and you can go for Giant Slayer and or Shiv. Of course you can just Shiv your Ashe and then play QSS on Swain instead. Now this board does not cap very high, but if you can go 8 and then find a Shyvana, you can actually pivot your board into 4 Shapeshifter, 6 Ragewing, and 3 Demancer. Now with this board, you actually don't need a Demancer spat, so you can of course force this every single game. However, keep in mind, if you don't hit Shyvana, then it's going to be a lot harder to top 4. But if you have an itemized Shyvana with Morello, Spark, and or anything else with a lot of damage, then she actually acts as a really good dual carry. Now, Swain and Shyvana should be sharing similar DPS. You don't always have to 3-star your Swain, but of course it helps if you can. Nico can hold on to your tank items, as Shyvana is a carry, not a tank. Moving on to Yone reroll, which is actually pretty strong this patch, and you can use a lot of the Mirage variations, which is quite nice. Now, Yone needs QSS Rageblade. The last item is usually going to have to be healing, but if you're lucky enough to get a healing augment, then you can of course run Giant Slayer and or Titans. It just depends on the lobby and what you get. Now when it comes to Yone, the default board is 4 Guardian, however you can also go for 4 Warrior, which includes Aatrox and Olaf until of course you get a Yasuo. Now the thing about Warrior is it only amplifies the AD component of Yone, so if you're playing the Mirage version of Spell Sword and or Warlords, you definitely don't want to go for 4 Warrior and instead usually go for 2 or none at all if that. Because you're slow rolling on 6, usually try and 3-star your Yone and Shen. You can of course 3-star your Braum and Thresh if you hit those as well, but those ones are less important than the Yone and of course the Shen, so okay. Once you push levels, you can usually go for a Deja once you get to level 8, and of course you cap this board really high if you get your hands on a Yasuo. That being said though, it's sometimes better to go for Idas, because if you go for Deja, you actually lack a lot of frontline, so you need to determine whether or not you think you need more frontline or if you think you need more damage via the Deja. Usually I'll default to playing Idas as this is much stronger and more consistent in a lot of lobbies. However, sometimes you can get away with a Deja if you happen to find a Yasuo as well, or if you have a lot of augments and you think you value the vertical Mirage trait. Next up we have Deja. I only really like playing Deja if it's Warlords or Dawnbringer. You can of course play Deja with the other ones, but I don't think they have as much success. I would definitely try and stay away from Electrocharge and or Pirates. I know Spell Sword and Duelist can work okay, but generally speaking I would prefer to just stick with Warlords and Dawnbringer. If you have Dawnbringer, then you want Archangels and Giant Slayer. This way you can ramp up enough AP. However, if you're playing Warlords, there's actually enough AP in the trait that you don't need the Archangels, and instead you can go for an IE Dual Gauntlet combo, and usually the third item is just going to be the Giant Slayer as well anyway. Otherwise, you can of course go for healing, such as a Hodge if you think that you need it. The standard board is going to be Deja, Nunu, Leona, and Yasuo. You can run Braum for Guardian, and you can run Hecarim for Cavalier. And then any extra units that you want to play will generally just be legendaries. Raka's really good, although not necessary if you're playing Dawnbringer because you already have enough healing. Bard's really good to increase your DPS if you think that you need it. And of course, Lulu's good to give attack speed to Deja if you think that she needs the ramping. Another solid comp this patch is Volibear with Cavs. You can play this without Cav spats, but it's a lot better if you do. You're running 3 legends centered around a Volibear carry with a dual carry of Anivia. Now, Volibear wants Rageblade QSS plus healing. Usually it's going to be BT ideally, but you can of course go for Hodge or Gunblade if you get that instead. Your anti-heal in the best form is going to be a Morello on Anivia because obviously it's very strong, and you want to make sure that you're feeding the Cavaliers to Volibear, Ornn, and Anivia. You would much rather feed the Lilia, Sedge, and Nunu because Hecarim's cast is actually useful, so you try not to let your Hecarim get eaten. Also, if you have Chalices in this comp, it makes it a lot better because of course the Chalice is going to be given to the Nunu, which will go towards the Ornn and the Volibear, but also because the Nunu's getting eaten, the Volibear actually gets more AP because of it. You don't actually have to 3-star Volibear to top 4 with this board, but getting to this board is actually quite difficult because you do usually need to hit an Ornn on 7, and of course Volibear during stage 2 and 3 is actually quite weak. And the final A tier comp we have is our Shin. Now you can be stable with our Shin 1 if you have Shojin Archangels, and then you can try and push 9. But this board can be a little bit inconsistent to hit if you're not fast 9 because you need to find Zoe, Bard, and Aoshin on 8, which can obviously be quite difficult. Your front line's always going to be an Ornn to get that 4 Tempest, and then usually the bruiser you run is Silas. This allows you to easily tech in 3 Mage, and you'll notice that this board is very, very similar to the ASOL. The only difference is that we of course want the Shojin on Aoshin. If you get another Shojin, you can play it on Zoe for sure, but Aoshin has a very high mana pool, so he usually needs at least 1 mana regen item. Starting off B tier, we have Siphon. Now this board does really well with mages if you can get lucky enough to get a Zoe on 8. Zoe of course wants to have Shojin, and because you're running Siphon Silas, it's really easy to get the third mage in, which can usually just be a random Nami. Now Siphon needs healing, usually it's just going to be BT, and then best in slot is Rageblade QSS. You can of course go for other items such as Runins, Titans, but they perform slightly worse. Then you can go for the standard 4 Bruiser, which is just going to be Shen Ornn. Shen's a really good unit, and then Ornn, of course, can give you Tempest and has a really significant cast. If you're going to drop any unit, then of course it's going to be Shen and or Lee Sin. And then you can play legendaries such as Bard and or Soraka to give yourself a little bit more survivability. Remember that this board doesn't do well with 3 mages unless one of those mages is Zoe. Next up we have Elise, who uses identical items to Siphon. However, you're actually going to prioritize the Elise items before you start itemizing your Siphon, as you're going to be rolling on 7 for this board. Now the final board looks something like this, where you get 3 Jade in with the Soraka and the Taric, as this gives your Guardian to your Thresh. Now the trick to this board is positioning in this specific formation so that you can use your Thresh to guide where the Siphon charges. Thresh will hook diagonally opposite, so you can swap him with Soraka last second, and then move your Siphon to the same side where your Thresh hook is going to land so that you can ensure that the Siphon's going to the clump that you want him to go to. With this setup, Neeko should take the main focus, and then Siphon can distract the main DPS as he charges towards the clump that you want him to, whilst Elise can safely ramp up. This comp does a lot better if you can get Celestial Blessing 2 or higher, as this means you can drop the BTs and instead run a Giant Slayer. And finally in B tier we have Scale Scorn. Now the main way to play this comp is having a Runins on your Olaf, because he stacks up a lot of AD when he dies, so the Runins is going to be doing a lot of damage, as well as the fact that it applies the Scale Scorn bonus magic damage. Diana wants a Spark, not only because this decreases the magic resist, which allows the bonus magic damage to do a lot more, but Spark as a direct damage item actually does more because of the Scale Scorn bonus applies to the Spark. Now as for your other items on Olaf, if you don't get Thrill or Celestial Blessing, you usually want to go for a BT just for a little bit of healing. Otherwise, you can also go for an RFC to keep him safe. He can also use items such as Giant Slayer, IE, and Rage Blade. Now, the other variation to playing this comp is if you get a Sin Spat for your Olaf, you always want to make sure that you get a Runin's IE, as this will allow you to run 4 Sins, and the IE crit multiplier will make Olaf do a lot more damage. In both instances, you're going to be running Ornn on 8, however, when you play the Sin variation, you're running Talon before you throw in your Ornn, so you can get 4 Sins. 4 Sins is not necessary unless you have a Sin Olaf, however. In C tier, we have Varus, who just got nerfed way too much, so I don't recommend playing this comp, but if you are going to play it, it's Rageblade, Runins, and GS as best in slot. Tank items can go on your Alawi, which ideally is going to be a Warmogs, because she already gets magic resistant armor with her cast. Now the standard variation to play Varus is you roll deep on 7 to 3-star the Varus and Alawi quite easily with Astrals, and then you just pivot into the guild variation and you can drop out the Astrals. Now the guild variation of this involves Twitch as your Swift Shot, and then you can run Kiana, Talon, and Ornn, and you can throw in 2 extra bruises if you want to get 4 bruises. Otherwise you can technically drop the Silas and Shen for other legendaries such as Bard and or Soraka. And the other C tier comp we have is Xayah. Now Xayah is pretty weak this patch, however if you do happen to find a Shyvana, what you can do is run Shyvana Neeko as your frontline, and then the comp actually becomes decent. Similar to Swain, if you can get some items on your Shyvana and have her as a secondary carry, then this comp actually isn't too bad. However, if you're playing the standard variation of Xayah where you don't hit a Shyvana on 8, then it's going to be a lot weaker. Best in slot for Xayah is Rageblade GS plus QSS. She already has built-in healing with the Rage Wing, and QSS just keeps her safe from a lot of the Sins and other casts out there. The standard board is going to be Twitch for your Swift Shot, and then your 3 Rage Wing is going to be Hecarim, Shen, and Xayah, and of course Shyvana gets you up to 6. You do want to get that Shapeshifter in. Neeko is just such a good unit, that's why you run her. However, if you don't hit a Neeko, you can of course run Swain and then just drop the Shen. Usually you're going to be running Ornn, so if you want Tempest, you can run Kiana, otherwise you're just running legendaries such as Soraka and or Bard, pretty similar to other comps, and of course you can cap this board out with the Yasuo on 9. And that is the end of the video. I hope you guys did enjoy learning about the meta comps of patch 12.14. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And if you want to talk with me, then come check me out on Twitch. At the time of this video going live, I will be live on Twitch, so come say hello. Thank you guys all so much for the support recently, and thank you so much for watching. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.